In this video, I'll show you how to install assemblies to the global assembly cache. But before I do that, I pretty much need to set up the motivation for using the global assembly cache because, after all, wasn't one of the promises of .NET that we would no longer have to register components and mess with all the stuff that basically resulted in DLL hell? So I'll go through some reasons why we might want to use the global assembly cache and what that gives us. And then I'll talk about strong names because, as it turns out, in order to put things into the global assembly cache, your assemblies need to have what's referred to as a strong name. So I'll explain what a strong name is and how you can create a strong name for your assembly. In order to do that, I'm going to need to talk about a couple of utilities that ship with the Framework SDK. One of them is the strong name tool, or the sn.exe. And then, of course, there's the installation utility for the actual GAC itself, GACutil. So before we go too much further, I need to describe what the global assembly cache is. You'll hear me refer to the global assembly cache as GAC. That's pretty common terminology. But basically what the GAC is just a well-known directory that the CLR can use to locate and load strongly named assemblies. So it's just a directory. It's under, in Windows XP you'd find it under C Windows Assembly, and then from there the actual physical file structure is somewhat cryptic, and it's not really important to the way you use it anyway, so I won't really go into it any further. So just keep in mind that the GAC is just some special directory that CLR can use to locate the assemblies that you create if you strongly name them. So why use the GAC? I mean, isn't the very spirit of .NET just the ability to use simple deployment, Xcopy deployment? This feels an awful lot like the old days of COM when you'd have to register a DLL with RegServer. So why am I going to jump through all these hoops to put my assembly or my DLL into some kind of global place? Well, as it turns out, this is one of the easiest and most convenient ways to share your assembly or any application that you want to share amongst multiple other applications. So if you had some core utilities or something in your enterprise that you wanted everyone to use, you could just run a script and install these assemblies on all of your production machines, and then everyone would use the same version. Another reason is that you can actually run multiple versions of the same assembly side by side. So you could create a utility, just call it 1.0, and you could compile other applications against that 1.0, and then maybe later on you'll come back and make some modifications, add a few new functions here and there, and then you'll be able to create new applications and compile against the new version and run both of those and not affect any of the old applications that were compiled against the original 1.0 version. So that can be very handy as well. And then lastly, and probably not least important, is the avoidance of name collisions. How many times have you created an application and deployed it in COM and then had a third-party vendor send out an update of their application, and it overwrote something that was important, something that might have been, say, in the System32 directory, and then all of a sudden your application doesn't work because something else that your customer installed on their machine relies on this new DLL that replaced the one that your application relied on. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the requirements of using the GAC is that the assemblies that you put in there have to have what's called a strong name. A strong name basically just means that it's got your assembly has 4 attributes. It's got a file name, or a simple name, which is just the file name minus the file extension. It's got a version. It's got some culture information, and it's got a public key token. And I'll show you what all this looks like in an assembly in just a moment. Let's take a look at some of this stuff in action. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and create a new C# project. I'll just create a class library. Let's just call this my assembly. And we'll put it in my little examples directory here. But what I want to point out is that when you create a new project in Visual Studio, a C# project that is, let me get to the Solutions Explorer, append that, you'll see that it also inserts this assembly info CS, and if you open that up, what you'll notice is that Visual Studio inserts little stubs for us so that we can create an assembly with a strong name. The first one you see here is this assembly culture. If we just put EN, that means that it's going to be English. We could also do English US. You see down here, it goes ahead and puts in a stub for a version number. And what this asterisk means is it just tells Visual Studio, go ahead and name this 1.0 point and then make something up. So if we wanted to be explicit, you would say 0.0.1. Then down here towards the bottom, you'll see this assembly key file. So in a minute, I'm going to show you how to use the strong name tool. And the strong name tool is a tool that actually creates this public and private key pair and it inserts it in a file. So you would just put the name of that file here. So we can go ahead and just insert my pubpriv.snk. SNK is just sort of the standard, stands for strong name key. The rest of the things we don't need to do. We don't want to delay the sign, so you can just save that. And let me go ahead and just create a simple method. We'll just return hello. And let me go ahead and build this, because I want to take a look at this through ILDASM. Oops, and of course it gave me an error because it's telling me it doesn't find this key. So let me go ahead and remove that until we can create that with our SN utility. Save it and build it. Now what I want to do is go ahead and open up ILDASM. What do we call it? My assembly. And it's in the bin, or rather, and it's in the debug directory. Do a dir and we see my assembly DLL, so ILDASM, my assembly DLL, and that opens up ILDASM. So let's just take a look at the manifest here. And you'll see, first of all, here's the module, my assembly DLL. It's got English US as a locale. Here's the version that we put in, 1.0.0.1. And so really the only thing that's missing is a public key token like this MS CoreLib has. So the next step for us to do is to go ahead and use the strong name tool to create a public-private key pair. And then we can point Visual Studio at that file, and it'll go ahead and insert it for us. So let me get these out of the way, and we can go ahead and use the SN tool. Okay, so I've navigated to the directory that's got the assembly in it that I want to associate a public and private key with. So what I'm going to do is just issue an SN question mark, and we can take a look at the different options that are available for the strong name tool. The first thing that you'll notice is that this tool is case sensitive, so make sure that you get the case right when you're using this, or you might get results that you're not expecting. And the switch that we're looking for is the dash lowercase k. We're going to generate a new key pair and write it into a file. So you just come down here to the bottom to our cursor here, and we just do SN dash lowercase k, and then we do my pubpriv key .snk, and then you see it tells us that the key pair was written to the file there. So if we do a dir in this directory, we'll see that my pubpriv key was indeed inserted in that directory. Okay, now that I've got a key pair, I want to go back into this assemblyinfo.cs file, and we'll go ahead and insert this name again, my pubpriv key.snk. That was indeed what I called it, my pubpriv key.snk, and save this, and we can rebuild this assembly. And now let's go ahead and take a look at ILDASM one more time. look at the manifest. And probably the first thing that you're going to notice is the addition of this public key. So here's the assembly, my assembly. This is the one that we just created. Let me resize this so get the whole thing in the frame. And this is a pretty long number. So this is the actual public key, and a lot of times what you're going to see is something that's called a public key token. They just basically take a hash, and so it's just a shortened version of the entire key there. So now we have a strongly named assembly, and now all we need to do is install it into the global assembly cache. So let me close out of here. And in order to install something in global assembly cache, you just use the GAC util. So you can just do a GAC util. And let's go ahead and issue this a help switch so we can take a look at what our different options are. You'll see here there is some uninstall options. One thing to note, if you're going to uninstall something with this command line utility, it doesn't prompt you and ask you if you're sure, so make sure that you're going to uninstall the one you want. The other thing to note, if you have two assemblies that are named the same thing, and you just issue it a /u and then the name of the file, it's going to uninstall every version, so just be careful. I'll show you in a minute an easier way to do that. So it looks like we're just going to use the /i and then the name of the assembly. So let's go ahead and do that. GAC util -i for install, and then we called it myassembly.dll. And you'll see that the assembly was successfully added to the cache. So now what we can do is let's go ahead and pull up the File Explorer, and said it was in Windows -assembly. And let's take a look at that and see if we can find it in here. There it is, My Assembly, version 1.0.1, English US, and here's the public key token. Remember I was talking about a token. It wouldn't be feasible to put that gigantic entire public key in here. So the other thing that I mentioned earlier was that I wouldn't recommend uninstalling something from the GAC via the command line tool. It's much easier just to come in here and do a right click and say delete. That being said, it's also probably easier for you just to come up here and drag your component into the File Explorer. The only thing I would caution you against is that that method isn't necessarily supported. All the documentation talks about using the GAC util, so it is possible that in the future Microsoft could change the underlying structure of the GAC, and then the only tool that would really be effective would be this GAC util. And besides the GAC util, it does offer all these different options, so just bear that in mind. In this video, I showed you what the global assembly cache was. I talked about some motivations for why we'd want to break from the spirit of simple Xcopy deployment with .NET. I explained to you what strong names were and how to create strong names with Visual Studio. I also showed you how to use the strong name exe tool so that you could create a public-private key pair and then in turn use that with an assembly directive in Visual Studio so that you could create your own strongly named assembly. And then I showed you how to use the GAC utility exe to install that strongly named assembly into the GAC. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.